We continue now at the top of Daf Tzadi Tesam and Beis in Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 99b. The Gemara continues with a statement of Rebbe Lazar, just like shekarka niknas bekesef or v'shtara v'chazaka, just like land is acquired with money or with documents or with a kinyan chazaka, kach s'chira, so too when it comes to rental, nikna bekesef or v'shtara v'chazaka. Rentals can be acquired either through money or document or through a kinyan chazaka. And the Gemara says, s'chiras ma'avidite. What are we talking about? That rentals are through kesef, shtar, and chazaka. The Gemara initially assumes we're talking about renting metaltalin, renting a movable object. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chisda says, S'chiras karka, we're talking about renting land. And Rashi explains, karka niknas bekesef o b'shtar o b'chazaka, land can be acquired with money, documents, or kinyan chazaka. Kinyan chazaka, says Rashi, is denoal, uparetz, v'gadar kolshu. If you close the fence, you open, you put up some kind of fence, those are all considered to be kinyan chazaka. S'chiras, then the Gemara said that s'chiras, rental, is acquired through kesef, shtar, and chazaka. Kasal kadaytach, initially the Gemara thinks, sachar behema v'kelim, we're talking about renting animals or kelim. That's why the Gemara says, Ma'avidite, what are you talking about, kesef, shtar, chazaka, by rental of behema and kelim? Lahaknos ad sheyimshach, you need a kinyan meshicha, umay chazaka below meshicha mashkachas le. What is a chazaka without pulling it? What does that even mean? And then the Gemara answered, we're talking about s'chiras karka, we're talking about renting land, hisker lo beso. Let's say a person rents another person his house, mishanasan lo kesef, from the point in time that the renter gives money, o shakasvu lo bailim at besi moshchan elach, or let's say he wrote a document, my house is given over to you, umasar lo ashtar, he gives him that document, that also would be considered to be a kinyan, it should be besi muskar lach, umasar lo ashtar, o shehechzik va'asocher, or if the renter makes a kinyan chazaka, ein echad mehem yachol lachzer, at that point in time it is final, and neither party can retract. And the Gemara continues, Amar Shmuel says, Haiman de Gozel Chavitza de Tamri Mechavero, if a person steals pressed dates from his friend, V'ispo Chamishim Tamri, and there are 50 dates that are all pressed together, Agav Hadodi Mizdavnon Benun Nechei, if a person would sell them all at once, it would sell for 49, but Chada, but if a person sells one date at a time, Mizdavnon Benun, then it would sell at 50. So the question is, how much do you have to pay back the person that you stole from? And so Shmuel says, Lehedyo, to a regular person, Meshalim Chamishim, Nechechadi, you pay back 49. We go by what it is sold, if it is sold all at once. Lehektish, now let's say he took it from Hektish, so then Meshalim Chamishim, he has to pay 50, Vuchum Shayu, and he also has to add a fifth. That's what happens when you take from Hektish. And then Shmuel adds, Masha'ein Kain B'mazik, this is not true if you damage Hektish, to Lo Meshalim Chumsha, when a person damages Hektish, you don't pay the added fifth. The Yamar Mar, because the master said, Ish ki yochal kodesh, it says when a person eats the hektish, prat lamazik, that excludes a case where the person damages the hektish. And Rashi explains, Chavitza de Tamri is Tamorim hamidubokim yachad, we're talking about dates that are pressed together, Kari Chavitza, that's called, it's like a cake of dates, V'isbohen chamshin Tamri, and there are 50 dates that are all pressed together, Agav hadodi mizdavnon chamishim nechei, together, if you would sell them all at once, you would sell it for 49. Halokeach yachad eno nosin behem elamem tes prutos. If somebody bought them all together, you would give 49 prutos. Kadesha yachzer v'yimchar achas achas v'yiskor pruta. The idea would be that the buyer would then sell it one at a time, and sell one at a time each for a pruta. He would make a profit of one pruta. And so then lahedyot. So the situation depends. If we're talking about where he stole it from a regular person, in mishal hedyot hu mishalim lo kemoshein nimkar miyachad. If it's from a person belongs to a regular person, then he pays him back as though they would be sold all together. Vein medaktik in lahachmer, if we're not strict upon the gazlan and say that he has to pay each one individual value, could come our time we're about to say the reason coming up, shaman beisa, we're going to bring it from a mishnah, masha'ein kain b'mazik. And then Shmuel said that's not true when it comes to someone who damages hektish. We're talking about someone who damages hektish, says Rashi, achumshin kai, we're going on the 1/5. There's no din of 1/5 by damaging hektish, and so that is the contrast between a case where the person, let's say, steals what belongs to hektish, or a case where the person damages hektish. And the Gemara continues, Maskif lo Rav Bevi bar Abaya. Rav Bevi bar Abaya asks, Lehedyo ramai mishalim chamishim nechei chada. Why is it that if he steals it from a regular person, he pays 49? Namely, he should say to him, Ano chada chada hava mizavnina lahu. The person who was stolen from should say, I would have sold it one at a time, and really it's worth 50. And the Gemara says to that what Rashi just mentioned, Amar Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yoshua. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, says, Shamin beis sa'ah ba'osa sa'ah. Let's say you have damage that happens to a field. The Mishnah says that Shamin beisa, we evaluate a beisa, which is a large amount of the field. We see how much that large amount of the field went down in value. And so therefore you see that you don't just look at the small item that was damaged, you look at the larger whole. And the same thing is true over here when you have the pressed dates. You don't look at each date individually and value it. Rather, you look at the entire thing. Rashi explains, Shaman Beisa Ba'oso Sa Tanan. The Mishnah says that you evaluate a base saw in the field, Gabi Nizak in the Shane. This is talking about, let's say, an animal eats from the field, and that's a damage that happens. Babba Kama, that's in Babba Kama, Ki Avrish Sada O Kerem Vagomer, comes from the Pasuk. Tanan, Ketzan Meshalemis Mashizik. It says in the Mishnah, how do you evaluate what should be paid? Let's say the animal ate from a patch from the field. Shaman Beisa Ba'oso Sa Kama Hoisa Yafa V'Kama Yafa. You take a Beisa, which is a much larger amount of the field. You say, how much was that worth before, and how much is it worth now that the animal ate from that small amount? You don't just evaluate exactly the produce that was eaten. That would mean that the damager would have to pay much more. You don't say, what was this patch worth that was eaten? Rather, you say, what is that whole beisa, this much larger amount of field? How much did that go down in value? If you were going to sell the land together with what was planted, how much did it go down because of this small patch that was eaten? That's basically a leniency by the person who caused the damage. He has to pay less now. The person is going to buy land, doesn't care about a small patch that was eaten. He's going to say, I'll just take a little bit off of the sale price, so that makes it that the damager pays less. And the same thing is true over here when we're talking about these pressed dates that were taken. We evaluate them as a whole, and so therefore the person that stole is going to pay less rather than evaluating each date individually. And the Gemara continues, L'meimra desavar Shmuel din hedyot lav kedin gavo adami. Does this mean to say that Shmuel holds that when we have the law by a regular person, it is not the same as the law by gavoa, as the law by hektish? Because here Shmuel made a distinction. He said you pay 49 if it's by a hedyot when you steal the pressed figs, but when we're talking about hektish, he said you pay 50 and then you add the fifth. It sounds like he makes a distinction between the two, but we have another place where Shmuel seems to say that the two are equivalent. But we learned in a Mishnah, not al evan o kora mi hektish. If a person takes a stone or a beam from hektish, lo mal, at that point in time it's not yet me'ila. Nasna lechaveiro, let's say he gives it to his friend, hu mal, so he's considered to be the one that committed the me'ila, v'chaveiro lo mal, but his friend is not considered to have committed me'ila. Bona besoch beso, let's say he took it and he built it into his house, lo mal at sheyodar tachteh, that's not me'ila until he actually lives under it b'shava pruta and gets a benefit that is valued at a pruta. So that's what we see from the Mishnah. V'yasav Rabbi Avo kamid Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Avo was sitting before Rabbi Yochanan. V'yasav v'ko'amar mishmei de Shmuel, and he was sitting and he said in the name of Shmuel, Zos omeris, this shows, hadar b'chatzar chaveiro, shalom midaitu, if somebody lives in the courtyard of his friend and his friend is not aware, tzarech lahalos lo schar, he needs to pay him wages, he needs to essentially pay him rent in that situation. And the point over here is that Shmuel is drawing an equivalence and saying, just like in a situation by me'ila where he lives under the beam and gets a certain benefit that's considered to be me'ila, so too if a person lives in the chutzner of his friend shalom midaito, he has to pay wages, he has to pay rent. And so therefore you see that Shmuel is making the two cases, he is considering the two cases to be equivalent, meaning hektish and hedyot are considered to be equivalent. That's a contradiction to what Shmuel said above. And Rashi explains, not al Evan, a person again takes a stone of hektish, but Meseches Chagiga Parchinan. So in Meseches Chagiga they ask on this Mishnah, Michti Mishkal Shakle, he already took it, Mali Bonahu, Mali Nasan Lechaver. What's the difference if he built it into the house? What's the difference if he gave it to his friend? The moment he took it, that should be Me'ila. What's going on in this Mishnah that we're waiting for these later stages? V'ukminan begizbar. So the Gemara over there says we're talking about a treasurer, Sha'avne Kodesh Mesurin Lo Askin, and he already has in his possession these stones of hektish because he's the treasurer of the Beis HaMikdash. So it's in his rishos anyway. Have a mincha, it's placed in his rishos anyway. Hilkach lo mal b'hag ba'aso. That's why in the Mishnah it's not an immediate me'ila when he picks it up. That's why you have to have these later stages, as the Mishnah goes on to say. It's not me'ila until he gives it to his friend, or let's say he builds it into the house and he lives under it the value of a pruta. Nasan lechaver. Now if he gives it to his friend, hotzio lechulin, now he's taken it out to chulin. Now he's taken it out of the possession of hektish. Shakana chaveru b'matanasu v'hu yishalem lehektish, because his friend has now acquired it through that gift, and now he has to pay hektish. Bona gizbor l'soch beis, or let's say the treasurer ended up using this stone or beam of hektish and built it into his house. Lo mal, it's not me'ila until he actually lives under it and gets the benefit of a prut of hasam ukimna kagon shenicha al pi aruba. To Loshanya, the case over there is that he put it, let's say, on top of a skylight in the roof. He didn't make any change in the item; he just placed it there. V'yasav Rabbi Avo garsinan, and then Rabbi Avo was sitting living, and he said in the name of Shmuel, Zos Omeris, this shows, the Chidor Tachtemol. What are we saying? We're saying that when he lives under it, that's Me'ilah. V'avagav delo shani, even though he didn't have it, there was no physical change to the item. Hador b'chotzer chaver, shalom midas bailam tzarech lahalos lo schar. So you see from that just living in the courtyard of one's friend without the knowledge of that person, the person needs to pay rent. Afilu b'chotzer delo kaim ula'agron. That's even true in a courtyard which the person wasn't planning on renting out anyway. Dahavele zenen v'zelo chotzer. That's the classic case where this one is benefiting and the other one's not losing anything. He wasn't going to do anything with his chotzer anyway. Ta'acha shalom midas hekdesh dar, because this is exactly the same. The person is living there without the knowledge of hekdesh. V'kamar d'mishalim me'ilah lehekdesh. We're saying he has to pay the payment of me'ilah to hekdesh. U'midekamar zo someris. And from the fact that the way Shmuel phrased it was this proves shma mino yolef hedyot me hekdesh ledaktek achrav. You see that we do learn hedyot from hekdesh, and that contradicts what we said above. Because again, what we said above is you can't learn hekdesh from hedyot. You can't learn rather hedyot from hekdesh, because we say by hekdesh it could be stricter. For example, again by hekdesh, by the pressed dates, we said they have to pay 50 as opposed to 49. And so the Gemara answers, Hadar be Shmuel me'ahi. Shmuel actually retracted from that comment. Rashi says, Hadar be Shmuel me'ahi means from the later comment that we just said. V'lo yolef minei hadar b'chatzer chaver shalom idayito shel balabais. He does not learn out from hekdesh that if you live in the regular chatzer, in the chatzer of a regular balabais rather, we don't say that you have to pay. Dashamina lehacha delo mashvi then hedyot hekdesh, because we see from the case of the pressed dates that he's not going to equate a case of hedyot with a case of hekdesh. So he essentially retracts from that statement. The Gemara says, but how do you know that he retracted from the later statement, from the statement that we brought about hadar b'chatzer chavero? Dilma meha hadar. Maybe he's actually retracting from the earlier statement about the press dates. And the Gemara says, lo no me'ahi hadar be. It is clear that Shmuel retracted regarding the statement of living in the chatzer of one's friend, kidder Rava, because it follows what Rava said. The Yamar Rava, because Rava said hekdesh shalom midas. When you have hekdesh without knowledge, that's kehedyot midas dami. That's the equivalent of a regular person with knowledge. Meaning hekdesh always has knowledge, because we're talking here about Hakadosh Baruch Hu, and so therefore there's no concept of living in the chutzner of hekdesh shalom midas. Clearly they are not equivalent. That's what Rava said, and that's Shmuel would agree with that as well. And Rashi explains kehedyot midas dami. When you have hekdesh shalom midas, that's the same as hedyot midas. Shehekdesh munach limon l'chol haba, because the hekdesh is sitting there, and anyone can be limol, anyone can commit me'ilah. Vein mocha biyada, no one's going to protest. V'rachmana amar man demisani limol v'rachmana yada. The Torah is saying anyone who gets benefit has committed me'ilah, and of course Hakadosh Baruch Hu rachmana yada. Hakadosh Baruch Hu knows what is happening, and so therefore that's considered kehedyot midas. There is no equivalence between the two. And the Gemara continues. Amar Rava. Rava says hani shekuloi de tavru chavisa de chamra. If you have these porters, they transport these barrels of wine, and they break the barrel of wine lechenva. It belongs to a shopkeeper. Biyoma deshuka mizdavna behei. Now, on the day of the marketplace, you could sell this wine for 5. Bishar yomi, but on other days, mizdavna ba'arbi, you can only sell it for 4. So ahadrule biyoma deshuka, if they return it to him on the day of the marketplace, mahadrule chavisa dechamer, they can just return to him a barrel of wine, and then he'll sell it for the 5. Bishar yomi, but on other days, mahadrule hey, then they should give him, they have to pay him 5. And the Gemara continues, now that's only true if he doesn't have wine to sell. But if he has other barrels of wine to sell and he didn't sell them, he should have sold those. And finally the Gemara says, he's allowed to deduct, they don't have to pay the full amount, they can deduct the amount of the value of the effort it takes to sell the wine, and also the value of barz nayasa. We'll see Rashi in a moment what exactly that means. Rashi says, shekuloi no say masa, again, shekuloi are people, they carry things, they're porters. Ahadrule biyom d'shuka. Now if they return it to him on the day of the marketplace, what that means is, kodem sheyagia yom hashuk. It doesn't mean necessarily on that day, but the point is they're going to pay him back before the day of the marketplace. So when that day comes, he'll be able to sell it. So then they could just give him the barrel of wine, and then he'll sell the wine. But if they don't give it to him in a fashion where he can sell it on the day of the marketplace, so mahadru lehe. So then they have to actually pay him 5. Diyamar lahu, because he can say to them, "You have a guy boy biyom d'shuk. If you had just paid me back a little earlier, and I had this wine on the day of the marketplace, place, hey haveshav, it would have been worth 5, so you owe me 5. And then the Gemara said, V'lo hamran de mahadru lehei ala deles lechenva chamra lezavune. We only say that they have to pay him 5 if the shopkeeper didn't have any wine to sell. The hashta vada yahadru nehile, because then we can certainly say if they had returned it to him, have him ezavinle, he would have sold it, he would have made 5. Aval havale chamra lezvuni, but let's say he had wine to sell v'lo zavin, and he didn't sell that wine that he had, gali daita de lo have mazvin. So then he's showing that he wasn't intending on selling it. V'lo mashalmi ala chavisa de chamra. Then they could just give him the barrel of wine, even though at this point in time the barrel of wine is not worth 5. They can just give him the barrel of wine, and that is sufficient. V'chi mahadri le nami hey. And then the Gemara said that when they do return him and they pay him back 5, menachi luchen voni mehei agar tircha kepoel bottle. So the shopkeeper has to deduct from that 5. He has to take off whatever the value is of the effort it takes, like a poel bottle of a worker just sitting. That's a certain amount of effort. Kama who wrote a leishev v'lo limchor yayin chavis achas pruta pruta v'yasha bottle. How much would a person want to take? How much money would a person want that instead of having to sell this wine, I'll just sit and do nothing. I'll be like a poel bottle, a worker who just sits. So that value, they actually saved this person, because again, by stealing the barrel of wine from him, or rather by breaking the barrel of wine and instead giving him money, now he didn't have to take the effort to actually sell that wine, so he deducts that effort. They don't have to pay the full 5, and also he also deducts with demei barz niyasa, the value of the barz niyasa also, he's saving that by not having to actually sell the wine, because again, they broke the wine and they're paying him back. Now, what is this value of barz niyasa? Rashi has 2 opinions. The first opinion is shenosin lemachriz ba'ir al hayayin b'shvakim, that the seller would actually pay some people to announce that he's selling wine. Over rechovos, he'd announce that b'shvakim over rechovos, he'd announce that in the marketplaces and the streets. Yesh b'vayis ploni yayin limchor, that so and so has wine in his house to sell. So that's a certain expense that he doesn't need anymore, so they can deduct that when they're paying him back. And we will note over here that the Mesoras Hashah says that according to this version of Rashi, tzarach lomar karz niyasa, the word shouldn't be barz niyasa, but it should be karz niyasa. Again, it has to do with making an announcement. And Rashi continues, barz niyasa lashon barza daishi belaz. The laze Rashi says that means nekev, it's like a hole that you put in the barrel. Kolomar yetzias hayan hanimkar bebarza beprutos, meaning the wine that is sold bebarza. Again, you put a hole in the barrel in order to dispense the wine. V'yesh mefarshim, so Rashi says, some explain, shayutzrichen liskor uman, they would need to hire a professional lenakev nekev bechavius to put the hole into the barrels. Mnei shehu shal cheres ulesaken barza. That's how you essentially set it up, because it was made out of cheres, it was made out of earthenware, so you had to put the tap into the barrel. Hanach devei menachi luhu, so that amount you deduct. Sharei patru mikolela, because now that they broke the barrel and they're paying him instead, he doesn't have to carry these expenses, and therefore they can deduct this from when they pay him back. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Amud Aleph.